On today's World Insight, the future of world trade as the second China International Supply Chain Expo is underway in Beijing. What will it take to keep supply chains working and to lower hurdles to free trade, especially punitive tariffs?
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The second China International Supply Chain Expo kicked off in Beijing on Tuesday, with over 620 companies and institutions gathered at the event. Global businesses seek cooperation in industrial and supply chains. On the bright side, China and the EU are reportedly close to a solution over tariffs on China-made EVs. Yet world trade is still on a bumpy road. On Monday, the EU announced a WTO challenge on China's anti-dumping measures on certain brandy imports. Meanwhile, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump vows new tariffs on all goods from Canada, Mexico, and China. How are these trade tensions likely to play out? What is the best way forward for all trade players? For answers, time to loop in our panelists. Joining us in Berlin, Ulrich Bruckner, Jean Monnet Professor for European Studies at the Stanford University. In Beijing, Liu Zhiqin, Senior Researcher at Chongyang Institute of Financial Studies with Renmin University of China. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Thank you for both of your time. Now, since when, Ulrich, has tariff become the hottest word in trade and economics these days? Why is that? As far as I remember, tariff was an old trick in the 1930s, if not earlier.
When I was a student and I looked into global politics and the global economic order, it was always a big success story to highlight what the WTO is doing by reducing tariffs across the board to pave the way for what then became globalization. The politics of freer trade that allowed the world to get richer, to allow emerging markets to catch up, and to have far more positive effects than also negative effects that also need to be addressed. But tariffs were considered to be an obstacle, and if we get rid of them, then the world would be a better place. And with 2016, when Trump entered the scene as a president who thinks in categories like deals or punishing competitors, tariffs suddenly became the tool in the toolbox that we discuss and still keep discussing, although it is a tool that is not the most sophisticated way to arrange something like a different global economic order.
Right. According to the latest news reports, President-elect Trump suggested about 20 to 25% raise of tariffs regarding Mexico, Canada, which is having a regional free trade agreement with the United States, and so-called extra 10% tariffs on China. Of course, we know all these numbers are always evolving and changing given the habits of the president-elect and the fact that it is not yet coming into the White House before any decision is being made. What is your immediate response?
Well, I think a few things come together here. On the one hand, he sees it as a weapon that he could use to punish not only rivals, but apparently even partners. Canada is not only close, but it is also culturally close. And it is an important trade partner for the United States. So if they are blackmailed and if they are punished, there is much more to come if he considers another country to be the number one rival, not to speak of what's happening with the allies on the other side of the Atlantic. So it's weaponizing economic tools. And it's also a sign that he or his team doesn't fully understand how global trade and economics work in the first place. because it looks as if he believes that if he manages to reduce imports, that would lead to an increase of GDP, which is a very simplistic understanding of economics, and that's as concerning as the weaponizing of tariffs as a tool.
Mr. Liu, your immediate reaction?
My action is that the figures that are issued from different resources, especially about the tariffs imposed on China, is still not confirmed. It's a controversial, is a big propaganda for the elected president in the United States. He is willing to say in this way to tell his voters that, or supporters, that he will honor his promise when he trying to be re-elected as president. So 10% extra or additional tariff on China's goods is not good news. It's negative. Will have very negative impact on the global security and the global trade economic development. Especially also will have negative influence the bilateral relations, because it will destroy the mutual trust that established already. So in this way, I mean that China and the United States should have close communications and even more negotiations on what they could be doing further to impose high tariffs on China's goods. That will damage the whole supply chain all over the world. It will damage also the recovery of the economic development in a short time.
Okay.
This is also not good to the U.S.
Well, the argument is to maximize the benefits of U.S. labor's workforce and also the U.S. economy. Is it likely to do that by increasing the tariffs, Mr. Bruckner?
No, this is not very likely to happen because, as my Chinese colleague already mentioned, it first and foremost distorts supply chains, and then you don't rebuild or reindustrialize the United States overnight. So the immediate effect of raising imports on something that you cannot immediately substitute is that we will see rising prices. Because of the lack of imported goods, there are already econometric studies that show that previous rounds of increasing tariffs put a burden of several hundred US dollars on every household in the United States. And one of the reasons why the elections went the way they went was that people are concerned about rising inflation. I have been in the United States for 6 weeks in the autumn, and I was shocked to see how high prices became and how difficult this is for a low-income segment in the American population. So if they think that imports help them to improve their situation, the opposite is much more likely to happen.
Mr. Liu, how is China articulating the possible impact of the future tariffs? As we know, and it can also become a very big negotiation tool for the president-elect or his trade rep.
Actually, I think China has already prepared for a long time to deal with the possible tariff imposed by the new U.S. government. As we know, we have some positive and supportive measures in financial sections, also in trade management, especially in the opening up and inclusiveness of our market in order to welcome more investors and trading business with China, to show the sincerity of cooperation with all over the world. Now, at the moment, I think the major policy should be adopted by Chinese government is that China should widely open its market as we promised, and also to have market access more easier and more effective for all their partners, especially for European and American investors, to give more the confidence of these investors that come back to China. Of course, we can see that high inflation in the United States will come back if the they impose the high tariffs on China's products. This is definitely the high inflation, high price, and high burden of the local people there. So this will be something that for Chinese government to consider to have more effective and supportive policy to support our economic development, especially to make the goods more price friendly and more transparent.
Ulrich, we understand China and the EU are now in negotiations regarding the EV tariffs. You earlier talked about tariffs has been an old trick. Why, while criticizing the president-elect of the United States about tariff, the Europeans, especially the EU, is following the same footstep?
There is no solid bloc of Europeans, and everyone has the same interest. But the European Commission sees the bigger picture, and they don't look through the lens of the CEOs that you talk to, because they are global companies and they are so active in China that for them, de-risking means to invest more in China. So everyone who doesn't have a local car manufacturing uses this tariff tool as a protectionist instrument to make a better deal, as a counter, as a follow-up reaction to what is happening in the United States. The Commission sees this as an instrument to highlight their leadership role, and no matter what the nationalities are, Ursula von der Leyen, after all, is a German. She's representing the interests of the European Union as a whole, to show we have a tool and we are not just allowing everything to happen because we are afraid of the big players, are more afraid of China's counter reactions, and then they will lose the most important market, which is the Chinese.
And as a result of that, how shall we understand the current meaning of tariffs? The chain reactions, as you just described, but understanding the fact that this about the EV tariffs the EU exerted on Chinese exports happened before the US election took place, and certainly before the pledges made by the president-elect. Whether it is used as a strategy or used as a way of bargaining, we do not know.
Well, it is definitely a way of bargaining. And economically speaking, we wouldn't need to sit here and discuss it for a long time because economically it's nonsense. We know that the politics of freer trade have positive effects for both sides. So anything that distorts this is a negative thing. The moment we securitize this and think about what is an electric vehicle, is it the same thing as a car that drives us from A to B? The answer is no. Because it collects data on a large scale, and the data is used for the purposes of improving the quality of the product, but it can also be a tool of espionage, which is in the American case a much bigger argument, and that's the reason why Biden didn't change it when Trump introduced tariff. So there are conflicting perspectives, and the securitizing of everything is something that negatively affects our economic relations. So generally speaking, there is a swing from politics of freer trade and believing in the positive effects of competition policy towards more protectionism and industrial policy to de-risk and to be more prepared for a more hostile global environment. And this is, economically speaking, pretty bad news.
How do you see tariff is being used, and what is the nature of tariffs these days?
Nowadays, in some special areas, especially for some Western major countries, they use the tariff as a weapon, as a political weapon, not only economically. They use this as a strategic means and also use it as a technical means This is a very serious challenge for the rest of the global community. I have so many good friends in the car industry in Stuttgart, in other cities. They feel much concern that if the tariff really imposed by the EU on China's car, that they have no other chance. They will delay their EU green technology for at least 5 to 10 years. So they should have close cooperation with China, with Chinese partners in order, not only for the market reason, but also for the shared future.
How is the rhetorics, at least, of using tariffs as a major means for economic income and so-called benefiting the workforce of economies, in a way deconstruct the common consensus, as to speak, about how world trade works, how trade is likely to become an important component of our economy? Is this train that is running, certainly at this moment, apparently off the track? Once we let it go on for quite a while, will it still come back? Will it still be able to come back to the track? I think that's probably even a bigger question than just EVs, than just whoever becomes the president of one of the largest economies in the world. Ulrich.
Well, it is a question of how you see the world or what priorities you set. If we look at it from a strictly economic perspective, it's pretty simple. And people with an economic education immediately understand what the negative consequences are. But then, as I said, there are the security people who look at it from a securitization point of view, and they come to different conclusions.
Of course, there's also suspicion whether so-called the security is being used as a rhetorical excuse for making an advantage in the so-called competition.
Of course, we can look at it, how valid the arguments are or not, but those people have a say in the definition of what is the problem. And if you have a hammer, like tariff, problems look like nails, and a lot of people feel tempted to use it for other rationales than the strictly what would be a rational use of a tool like this from an economic point of view. Because the third dimension is that we live in times of rising populism, and it sounds very appealing to use something that an average worker with not so much education and understanding of global trade would think that this is a tool that protects me and it helps my situation to improve. And this whole rhetoric of reindustrializing the United States with tools like this is something that resonates and that explains why short-term benefits in terms of getting popular support domestically is superior over the economic costs that one might understand or maybe not. But it is definitely something that plays in why we have a discussion like this.
So following what Ulrich just said, Mr. Liu, will tariff spread like a pandemic as we see it?
I'm afraid it could be such a scenario because we know no tariff, no trade. But if the tariff is too high, too extremely too high, there is also no fairness of trade. So this means that if this tariff could not well managed in an inclusive way and openness with the global community, I think it could be spread as a pandemic, because some other countries will follow such a bad example. But at the moment, I don't think that for some major countries that are afraid of losing their market, at the moment, especially for losing the great potential market in China, they have to consider and reconsider the impact, what the consequences they will face if they really insist to have a high tariff on China's product. That will tremendously increase the price and also tremendously disrupted all this supply chain, make their own labor cost in their home also very high, and the low income, and they make more unemployment. Such big burden, the problem will cause their concerns.
We are already hearing, Erlich, words coming from certain politicians of certain economies in North America about decoupling in the supply chain, for example, from China. We have also been hearing certain gestures coming from car manufacturers, for example, asking their suppliers to lower their price 10 to 15% for the next year, 2025. One would assume that is for the purpose of eventually have a more balanced sheet in terms of their, how shall I say, in terms of how they operate, because they will be exerted with certain kinds of, certain percentage of tariffs. So how do you see these chain reactions that's already taking place right now? And what does that mean for the overall industrial structures worldwide?
Look at the country that I know best, that is based on a set of assumptions that are now currently at risk for political reasons, then the future of industrial production in Germany are not very bright. It was based on cheap energy from Russia, which ended with Russia's invasion in Ukraine. It was based on the guarantee of stable and well-protected supply routes around the world by the American guarantees of providing security. And now we hear that NATO might be obsolete again, or the partners will be punished if they don't do exactly what the next government wants to do. And there is a rising concern about being too dependent on imports if the dependency reaches 60, 70, 90%. So the de-risking strategy to find new partners will change new trade relations, but the weaponizing of trade instruments for other purposes, for example, the point of Canada will be punished with something that is totally unrelated to trade. They should fix security problems, and they should fix migration, and the import of narcotics or whatever Trump comes up with looks stupid at first sight, but then strategically thinking, it puts Canada in a position that it has to support the United States in an alliance against China, which then again becomes an economic problem. So all of this is very concerning, and we are far from having a functioning global order, which we urgently need, because there are so many problems that need to be fixed. And in order to fix them, we need healthy economic relations.
Mr. Liu, of course, China has been adjusting its economic structure from earlier depending much on exports to now trying to create a big national market and also welcoming overseas investment and becoming a place in which imports have become the final destination, reflected by the seventh already International Import-Expo, the only one in the world, one can say. But to what extent China will be able to weather the storm, particularly if you think about the businesses and the supply chains even within the country? How much will the suppliers for the bigger companies be able to endure this possible storm? How prepared are they, given your in-depth knowledge of China's reality?
During the trade conflicts, the compensation is always a good way to make a balance between high tariffs and the low cost. Because how to make the tariffs or low cost or lower the price, they have many alternatives, especially for China. Also, we have already built up a full swing of the industrial production line. That means we can have our ability to produce all spare parts and products in China. So that can make a good price competition. And secondly, also, the Chinese engineers and techniques are very innovative. It's very active in the innovation. They always try to find the best way how to save time, to save money, save cost, especially for also raw materials, energy cost, electricity cost also, or the other ways that to save cost. In this way that we can make our cars still competitive in the global market. The other reaction from our central government already pay great attention to make a better tax and fee system to make more friendly and feasible conditions for companies. No matter big company or small companies, they have the similar ground to make a good competition. If your product is good with high quality, with price friendly conditions, I think you will have good market. This is our principle for doing business. Actually, our principle in Chinese enterprise is that we never give up. No matter we have conditions or we have no conditions, we have to create a condition to fulfill our mission. This is the strategy of our enterprises to deal with all challenges and uncertainties we are facing.
Some of the leading investors in the world have been suggesting the current time is the best stress test about the capabilities of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial spirit for our generation. I guess that's not an exaggeration. But Mr. Bruckner and Mr. Liu, what do you think should be the nature of tariff? And how much danger is there if that is being used as a weapon and as a bargaining chip for future negotiations, given your wide knowledge, your deep knowledge about international trade? Mr. Bruckner, briefly.
Well, in that respect, I'm a pacifist and I'm against the weaponizing of economic instruments like this. I think we have enough stress without tariffs, so I would rather see an alternative solution.
Mr. Liu.
Tariffs could be a good tool for cooperation and inclusiveness. Only by mutual understanding and mutual benefits, I don't think tariffs will be a threat to the global trade business.
Thank you so much, Uli Bruckner and Liu Zhiqian. Appreciate it. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us.